I'll now leave it all to you, and I want to thank the audience and the speakers and our sponsors for being here today. Thank you, and over to Chris.
All right, indeed. Well, thank you, Eefke, and it's a pleasure to join everyone today. Welcome to a program called Research Published Sorted. My name is Christopher Keneally. At CCC, I host our podcast series, Velocity of Content, which is also the name of the CCC blog. Both may be found at copyright.com. And it's certainly a pleasure to be here for Society Day as part of the 2021 Spring Conference. This closing program should make for a pleasing complement to the previous presentations already today. Earlier, Publishing with a Purpose drew together important ways for society publishers to achieve the aims and missions of their organizations while advancing global ambitions to address social inequality and threats to the environment. Just now, a preview of new standards and solutions from STM has offered a glimpse of a future where AI and data-driven tools drive out friction in research and publishing. And in the hour ahead, my guests will consider further the promise of data to transform our workflows, and beyond that, to remake our professional cultures. For society publishers, data-related best practices, especially those related to transformative agreements and the relationships with funders and institutions, can open up important opportunities to reinforce other relationships, especially those with their members in the research community. We have a full program ahead in the next hour, and I want to begin with Taunton Payne. Taunton Payne, welcome. Taunton,
hi, thank you. Yes, I am.
Great. Let me just briefly describe his background. Taunton Payne is director of the Scientific Data Sharing Policy Division in the Office of Science Policy and the Office of the Director of the National Institutes of Health. His division is responsible for issues relating to NIH's data sharing policy, including issuance of the recent NIH Data Management and Sharing Policy, oversight of the NIH Genomic Data Sharing Policy, and management of the Data Science Policy Council. And for an organization with the clout that NIH has, I think it's appropriate to start with Taunton. Taunton, welcome again, and please present your program. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to try and share my slides really quickly here. All right. Okay, great. Can you see that?
Indeed.
Great. Great. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to be able to talk about our new data management and sharing policy that NIH just issued in October of 2020. I'll go over a bit of the specifics of the policy and what we're trying to achieve here, and then I'll just sort of conclude with a couple of thoughts about journals and publishers and the roles that they can play in this policy as well. So why does NIH want to share research data? There are a couple of sort of overarching reasons, I think, partly described in the policy itself. So first, we really want to advance rigorous and reproducible research with the funds that we have. And we want to do this in part by trying to enable validation of research results through the sharing of scientific data. And I'll come back to what we mean by scientific data in a couple of slides. I think an ancillary goal is also to try and make high value data sets available so that future questions that might not have been part of the study teams thinking on the topic can also be addressed to sort of help accelerate future research directions. And of course, we also hope that there's a kind of a networking effect that occurs when people have the opportunity to cite and collaborate through their data. There's also, I think, sort of non-scientific rationale as well, primarily a sort of interest in trying to promote public trust in the research that we fund. I think sharing research data helps to foster transparency and accountability in the research that we fund. And sharing data also helps to sort of demonstrate stewardship over taxpayer funds. And of course, there's also a kind of ethical argument here too, that maximizing research participants' contributions is something that data sharing can help to achieve. So in terms of what the policy expects, so it's really trying to, I think, foster a sort of cultural shift, one toward having kind of a stronger culture of data management and sharing practices to sort of better data stewardship. It says this fairly explicitly in the policy as well. It only has really two kind of hard requirements. So the first is there's an expectation for the submission of a data management and sharing plan for all NIH-funded research, no matter how much money they are requesting or the type of research award, whether it's grant or contract. And that plan would describe how, where, and when data will be managed and shared. And then it also expects compliance with that plan for the awards that we make. And we're pretty explicit in the policy that compliance with the plan and the policy can affect future funding opportunities for applicants. It has an effective date of January 25th, 2023. So it was published in October, but it won't become effective for new and competing awards until January 25th, 2023, where it will replace the 2003 data sharing policy. And we've also published a couple of additional resources alongside it in the form of supplemental information to try and help people understand their applications better. I won't dwell too much on this, but just in terms of some of the details of the policy. So it really focuses on scientific data, which are data that are defined as being sort of commonly accepted in the scientific community as being of sufficient quality to validate and replicate the research findings. It doesn't include things like preliminary data, and it doesn't apply to physical objects like, biospecimens. We do say in the policy that we sort of expect investigators, while they are drafting their data management and sharing plans, to try and maximize appropriate data sharing, but understand that there are ethical, legal, and technical factors that may limit to some extent, how broadly data can be shared. And in terms of the timeline for making data available, what we say is that we would expect data would be shared no later than the time of the publication of the findings or the end of the award if those findings are unpublished. And we do have some expectations that relate to sort of how long the data should be made available for, but that really is something that we want people to draw from other sources of requirements that they have, such as journal policies or repository policies. As I mentioned, there's a number of sort of supplemental information documents published alongside of the policy. And one of the things that the policy says is that we want to sort of push people towards using established repositories as sort of the primary model for sharing here, as opposed to perhaps how things may have worked in the past, where people might sometimes say, if you're interested in obtaining my data, you can contact me. NIH does make a list of repositories available that we fund or support. This is not necessarily the list that people need to use to select a repository, but we've provided supplemental information with the policy to sort of help investigators identify what makes an appropriate data repository and focus on characteristics like the use of persistent unique identifiers and the ability to sort of ensure quality assurance. That said, NIHICs do sometimes designate specific repositories as a condition of funding for specific kinds of projects. We also have supplemental information that we released around kind of certain costs that can be charged either as sort of direct or indirect costs that relate to data management and sharing. So for example, we say that reasonable costs can be allowed in the request for budgets for curating data and developing, supporting documentation. We understand that these activities aren't necessarily free, as well as for preserving and sharing data through repositories. So for example, some repositories may have a fee that they charge, and we would expect that can be a direct cost of awards. There's certain types of costs that we would not consider to be direct, such as general infrastructure costs. Those would generally be sort of indirect or overhead costs. We have a number of activities planned for the implementation period until January 2023. So first off, we're doing a lot of outreach to try and make sure that the community is aware that this is coming. There is a National Academies workshop planned for tomorrow and the day after that will really focus on this issue and in particular around sort of implementation considerations both for NIH and for the community itself. So we're also, I think, trying to focus on building sort of streamlined tools to make sure that compliance is kind of as painless as possible. And there's been some discussion about, potentially posting publicly data management and sharing plans that people submit to us. And there's a couple of other resources that we're trying to develop as well, such as, FAQs and guidance to help people comply with the policy. So in terms of the role that publishers and journals might be able to play in realizing kind of the benefits of data sharing and the goals of this policy, I think there's a couple of different areas where we think that they may be able to help. So first, facilitating sharing of supplementary materials such as data sets, which many journals, of course, are already doing. I think that that's a really helpful way for people to potentially be able to comply with the policy if, for example, journals might have a repository that people could comply with as part of the process for publication that might make things sort of streamlined and, really painless for them. And I think this goes back to what we were just hearing in the prior talk, but, I think one other area that we could see some further work is around, ensuring greater use of data availability statements, really creating that sort of connection between the publication and the underlying data set. And last, one area that I think are sort of keenly interested in is this issue of sort of ensuring appropriate citation of data sets. And journals certainly could, potentially help by trying to provide, instructions for authors with, standards for data citation and things like that. So I will stop there, and thanks. And there's a series of resources here for those who want to know more.
Well, Taunton Payne with NIH, thank you so much for that. And I think it's important to reflect that in programs like this, we have heard from funders in the past, and the kinds of pronouncements they make are mandates, and really that's just a synonym for commands. And what I thought I really got from your presentation today, while this is certainly compliance driven, it's incentive driven as well. And I think you think that's a very important piece of this.
Right, that's right. Yeah, I think we're trying to, in a policy, obviously, we have some obligation to make sure that there's a sort of strong compliance aspect to this too. But I think where we really want to get to is having this be sort of a self-sustaining enterprise where the incentives are, aligned with where we want to go. And so this is why I think we're also particularly interested in this issue of data citation, because this is one way in which we think people could, potentially sort of see the benefit of sharing data themselves.
All right, well, Taunton Payne with NIH, thank you very much indeed. And I want to bring on now Waylon Butler. Waylon, welcome.
Hello.
Waylon Butler is Director of Customer Experience, Order Processing, and Business Intelligence at AIP Publishing. In this role, he drives system and process improvement, seeks ever higher levels of product quality, and steers development of data and analytical capabilities. AIP Publishing is a not-for-profit subsidiary of the American Institute of Physics and provides scholarly publishing activities in the fields of physical and related sciences on behalf of several publishing partners. And so your author experience is very important to your work. And Waylon, tell us about your presentation, please.
All right. So I'm going to present today, if I can share my deck. So do we see that, Chris? A list of those publishing partners? Excellent. Right, so as of now, we have 11 publishing partners. So as a publisher in our own right, as a not-for-profit society scholarly publisher, we work with these 11 partners to publish journals and books. We have currently a portfolio of 36 journals and conference proceeding series, and a growing books program that we have been launching over the last few years. Now, to your point, Chris, we do work with these societies and therefore their members as authors and readers of the content. So understanding that engagement with societies and the members and the researcher community is very important to us. So I will, when PowerPoint starts to cooperate. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of from an opening of science perspective, the focus that AIP Publishing has taken over the last few years is a little different than what Taunton just walked us through. We have been focused on opening the research content, the actual article content itself, not the underlying data. Very often we don't have the underlying data unless the author has included that as supplemental materials or they've made some reference. We're in early days of making strides toward those data availability, linking to data sets, kind of everything that Taunton was describing is something we're interested in, but we're not quite there yet. Instead, we've been focused on kind of supporting the initiatives from funders, from researchers, from research institutions about opening science via open access to the article content, to the final original research content. Now, we've gotten a focus drive from this from a number of our organizations with which we already have relationships that have been seeking transformative arrangements. Specifically, a few of them, Max Planck in Germany, CNR in Italy, a few single institutions, University of Vienna and the Tokyo University of Science, for example, have approached us and worked with us to create transformative agreements to help them transition the monies that they would be spending on access to content, subscriptions or access fees, transition that to funding for the opening of the research so that articles from Max Planck, for example, can be made open access and available to the world for reading. So again, early days, we've got a few of these signed transformative contracts for 2021. We expect to sign a few more in the coming weeks. We do expect this volume of transformative agreements to roughly double for 2022. And then we have a kind of a longer pipeline into 23 and 24 with additional institutions that have expressed either interest or a mandate, as you were saying, Chris. Something that they must have to support their transition to opening the science and opening the research funded at their universities. So when we look at this, looking at the key data sets, what information we do have already, what do we know we have, what do we have in structured or potentially in unstructured databases? You know, we have information about the manuscripts themselves. What is the content? What journal is it in? What a license is it already being published under? We have information about the authors, you know, who's the primary corresponding author, who are the contributing authors, information about those authors, you know, based on profile data they've provided to us. The institutions, in particular, the subscribers, those institutions that are paying money for read access today, and information about funding. Is there funding from, we're a physics publisher, so we don't get a lot from NIH, but NIH or Wellcome Fund or Department of Energy, you know, where is the funding for the research coming from as described to us by the author? So this leads us to a kind of a tactical focus of how do we engage, how do we support these transformative agreements, how do we open access to these articles? So we initially kind of set aside funders for AIP publishing, again, physical sciences, some of the drive, some of the kind of policies or mandates that some funders have put out, we haven't felt as much pressure from. It's just an artifact, I think, of physical sciences. So we've been focused on this connection between the manuscripts, the authors, and the institutions to understand how to support the transformative agreements. How do we actually fulfill them and help our customers and authors meet their needs and meet their mandates? So we get kind of nitty gritty. This is where kind of some of the thread of standards that may run through our discussions today. We have kind of used Ringgold IDs. We've chosen Ringgold as a set of standard identifiers for institutions. We're linking this to our subscribing customers to understand which, you know, which Harvard is Harvard or which MIT is MIT. Linking that and enriching the data that we are receiving from our authors as relates to the manuscript to understand which manuscripts definitively, as best we can, are related to those institutions. And throughout, we're trying to establish this and trying to leverage these Ringgold ID standards in ways that minimize disruption to the workflow, minimize additional work to the authors. We want this, and we want this whole process to scale without adding cost if we can. We don't want to build out a system to capture better data that also adds cost and makes the publishing process more expensive for authors or institutions. So as we go through, we've gone through this work over the last 18 months, 2 years, we definitely have some challenges, opportunities. Data quality is tough. We're heavily dependent on the quality of the data the author provides us at the point of submission to start to understand which articles are related to which institutions. This has led us to, lots of work in terms of enriching and improving matches from an affiliation that an author may write into a standardized institution name and therefore a Ringgold ID that lets us normalize and match across different data sets. We have the challenges of different systems. Certainly for us as a partnership publisher with those 11 partners, we have disparate manuscript tracking systems. So we have to contend with different systems housing the data. So merging that, different source rules, different validation rules at the point of submission. Challenging of managing multiple affiliations for authors. Author may be affiliated with multiple institutions and doing research at different institutions based on different topic areas. So understanding and appropriately managing and mapping those affiliations to the manuscript and the institution has been a challenge. Another component, again, we're using Ringgold as our standard, as our normal standard. Understanding the institutional hierarchy. For example, we understand that Harvard is my go-to example. I'm going to use it a few times. Harvard University is a customer who's subscribing to read content historically. Authors from Harvard may be listing an affiliation at a lab, at a particle accelerator, at the Department of Physics, or Harvard University. So also understanding and working within the institutional structures to know which departments and which labs roll up to the same university or same research institution so we can make matches across these disparate data sets. And in all of this, there is the balance of what's the author's experience versus our desire for higher quality data. More rigid and more draconian requests and needs for validated data puts greater burden on the author to either go through cumbersome submission forms when they're submitting a manuscript, or being restrictive if there is a spelling or a name, an institution name that we don't have on our validated data list. We're forcing the author to choose. So throughout all of this, there is that balance of what's the author's experience and how easy is it to submit a manuscript versus our desire to have higher quality data. So looking at what's next. So for our current state, the next area that we're looking at, we want to dive into those multiple affiliations and nuances of those affiliations to better understand how we manage those and how we might allocate credit, if you will, back to the institution if authors have multiple affiliations or there are multiple co-corresponding authors. We do want to start to understand how to engage with multi-payer models where research institutions may wish to share back with funders or the author the fees for open access publishing. We certainly now want to move to incorporate funder information so we better understand how funders enter that mix between institutions and authors. And a chance I think there's some opportunities for new standards to be developed. We've had some discussion about institutional repositories. So in addition to AIP publishing open access, those articles also being deposited into Harvard's or other institutions' repositories. But there appear to be there's no established standard. So that's an area where standards could certainly come into play. I've heard of one that goes by the acronym of SWORD, SWORD, which is a particular subset of, I think it's the ATOM publishing protocol. So there may be the emergence of new standards there. Something that we've thrown around internally is the need for a counter reporting standard potentially. We have counter reports that help us, that set a standard so that we as publishers can provide consistent information about that downloads or denials for research content, for content that's being paid to access. How can we provide a similar set of standard reports on the publishing side? As well as, is there an expansion? We picked Ringgold because with a data set we're familiar with. Are there other standards for institutional affiliations that may emerge? That's what I got.
All right. Well, Waylon Butler with AIP, thank you very much indeed. And very briefly, we will have a roundtable discussion and take questions from the audience at the end of the program. But you mentioned that this work you're doing, you don't want to add cost, but I would imagine that over time, there's the potential to drive some costs out of the process as well, that data has a positive net effect.
Maybe. I think that the challenge from the cost, where as a publisher, where we have costs, the publication of the article will still continue. We still have infrastructure to support. We still have to support the peer review process and the manuscript submission process. The costs of publishing are not changing by transitioning to under which license the article will be issued. So we're taking an approach of, we are trying to leverage data and technology and automation as much as we can, so that it certainly in the short term that we don't add costs to the process. Although I think there are some inherent costs. For example, we already licensed the Ringgold data set, and we already use that. If another publisher wanted to tackle that, they would have to pay for access to some of these standardized data sets. So I would actually counter, Chris, that there might be in the short term that an additional cost to gain access to standardized data sets.
You starting to vote? No.
All right, well, thank you again, Waylon Butler. We will come back to you at the end of the program with more discussion. I want to welcome now Sabile Geisenheiner with ACS Publications. Sabile, welcome.
Yes, hello, Chris.
Yeah.
Hello, I'll tell the audience briefly about your work. You are Director of Open Science Strategy and Licensing at ACS Publications, a division of the American Chemical Society. You support your colleagues at ACS in working with institutions, consortia, and funders on new transformative models and expanding the necessary infrastructure. I want to welcome you and let you begin your presentation. If you are watching our show and can mute yourself, that I think provides a little better audio experience for our listeners. So if you would do that, that would be good. But Sabile Geisenheiner, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks and hello. And I unfortunately have some internet issues here today, so I will turn off the camera as soon as I have shared my screen, just not that you're losing me halfway through. Just see if that works.
Yep, we're seeing your screen now, I think. Yep. There we go.
Okay, just let me stop that. Yes, so data is actually the headline here, I think. And yes, I have to say thank you to Waylon, the former speaker, because I think a lot of what I'm going to present is very much in line from the experience AIP was having with transformative agreements. But I'm just going on to if PowerPoint is doing what I want it to do. Ah, it's moving, yes. So just to give you a little bit of a background, ACS is a division of the American Chemical Society and supports researchers through journals, ebooks, scientific programs, and news magazines. ACS Publication is a long-time leader in open science and open access, and you can see that here on that range of data points on the slide. We are a pioneer in both author-centered open access programs and ACS read and publish agreements. And just recently, we added 9 fully open access journals to our journal family. And for today's presentation, I'm going to focus on data around publishing, funders, grantees, and who wants and needs what data around the negotiation table. So if we almost looking back, but I mean, some of those, or a lot of those agreements are actually still in place, but in a subscription world, in many cases, we had those one-to-one scenarios, like the negotiation between an institution and or a consortia and a publishers. And also these might have been long discussions around some details, mainly around year-on-year price increases. The overall data points have been pretty clear. So like the number of journals in the portfolio, new journals added, backfile access, usage, cost per download. That was actually the usual data points we were talking about. In a transformative agreement world, this looks very different. First, it gets crowded around the negotiation table. So next to publishers and institutions, we have funders mandating OA and in a way influencing library decisions and spends going forward. And former consumers and users of content play a different role in all this setting, being now defined more as researchers and authors in read and publish agreements. But I mean, in the end, they are still the same people, but they're playing a different role. And for many institutions and publishers, those diving into read and publish agreements, it's maybe really the first time looking at actually who is publishing and who is reading the content and defining the gap in between. So it is critical to get a clear understanding and view of the individual engagement score between an institution and a publisher. And you need to collect a lot of data. And I've listed just a couple of data points we are looking at if we start going into negotiations around new transformative or read and publish agreements. So it's starting from current spend on subscription and APCs separated by open access and hybrid spend on APCs. And how is this all adding up? All the same for the output as well. So the ratio of OA and hybrid in gold publishing, total output, trends. And for all of that data collection, and Waylon was mentioning that as well, there are very valuable resources available, such as Ringgold, but also it's important to work with ORCID and Fundref. Analyzing those multi-site deals can really take a lot of resources, and I assume all of you who have been involved in read and publish agreements can agree that the sales teams really have a good bunch of work to do to get all the data together for those agreements. But if you have it, it's really working like a big data washing machine. So the work on renewals is much simpler as the data is getting cleaner. And I'm just diving into, and it's interesting that Waylon concentrated very much on Ringgold as well. I'm just going to show one data aspect here to leave enough time for questions and discussions. ACS workflow has been developed in partnership with the Copyright Clearance Center, and it separates the publishing and open access workflows. And as we just heard, data is key. And data starts really with submission. And once the author selects in our system from the drop-down box during the submission process, the correct affiliation, this triggers really everything else in the workflow. So if that is if the author is from an institution of a read and publish institution or partner, then this is really triggering the right workflow and driving the author in the right licensing lane. If the author decides to free from their institution name, a warning box will appear and letting them know they could miss out on institutional agreements and actually requesting them to use the drop-down selection. That might be painful for the author, but actually it's really the only way of getting the data clean. And we actually had a big success here, and the program enhancement have dramatically improved data accuracy and increased author affiliation selection from 15 to 90% for the authors. And same as AIP, we really see a big increase on those transformative agreements. In 2020, we have had over 2,800 articles published through the open access transformative agreements. In 2021, we also estimate doubling that OA amount, output amount, by serving now 23 countries in 69 agreements. But behind those agreements, there are over 350 institutions participating and actually taking advantage on those workflows. So, and what is next to come? And this is also going in a similar direction as well. And I think we need much more involvement of funders on those transformative agreements. We do have one agreement in place in Austria, actually, where the FWF is very much engaging and actually is part of the read and publish agreement there, and takes this way direct care on their publishing output. So it doesn't really matter anymore who in this agreement is actually having the corresponding author. As soon as the FWF sees it's a funded paper by them, they take care of it. And that puts actually the relief on the institutions because they just have to take care on the non-funded, or at least not by FWF funded papers, plus the reading side of the contract. And in the end, this is what we want to see, that there's really a shift in those financial flows in the system. And in the end, this is really leading to much more open access, and that's what we all want. So, and that's actually already everything from me, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, Sibylle Geisenheiner, thank you for your presentation. And you know, this is Society Day today at the STM Spring Conference. So I want to ask you about the reaction from contributors, from the researchers that you're working with. I mean, is there a lot of education that has to be done with the contributors around the requirements, around the importance of data?
It has gone much better, let's say it that way. We have improved, together with CCC, the workflow, enhanced the workflow quite a lot over the since the beginning of this year, actually. And we see, and it's much clearer now. So it is easier for the authors to find their way through all of that language and picking really the right license and all of that. So I think we improved a lot, and we have a support team still, which takes questions from authors, but the feedback we get is really that it is very much straightforward, and if there are any questions, they are easy to answer.
All right, well, Sibylle Geisenheiner with ACS Publications, thank you very much. And our final presenter for this program is Josh Dahl. Josh, welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Can you hear me?
Indeed, I can, and we can see you as well. Tell the audience briefly about your work. Josh Dahl is Head of Publishing and Associations for the Scientific and Academic Research business of Clarivate Analytics. He is responsible for overall management and strategy of workflow and analytic solutions that serve publishers globally. As a member of the leadership team at Clarivate, Josh works closely with publishers to understand the changing dynamics around scholarly communications and peer review, and to bring a customer focus to that vision. And so, Josh, over to you for your presentation.
Great. Can you just confirm you're seeing my screen?
Indeed, yes.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. And yeah, as Chris said, I'm with Clarivate, product director, and with responsibility over our publishing and association solutions. So Scholar One is one of the areas that I have a focus. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Data Balancing Act and complements a lot of what Waylon and Sabeel, as well as Townsend, had talked about in terms of kind of the challenges of getting the right data without degrading the author experience. And just as a reminder, this is everyone here, I'm sure, has this strategy as part of your overall publishing strategy moving forward, is the focus on the researcher, focus on the ease of use, focusing on making it as easy as possible for the researcher. And, of course, there's already a lot of things that the researcher has to do in order to get published. There's the pre-submission workflows, submission itself, peer review and acceptance. And all of these agreements, these policies around data sharing, they add additional touch points with funders and institutions that need to be made throughout the publishing process. And as both Waylon and Sabeel had mentioned, there's a lot of focus on getting the right data around the institutions and the funders that are tied to every paper that's flowing through the publication process. You need that standardized data. You need to be able to match that up with agreements. You need to be able to drive downstream workflows with that standardized data in order to avoid a lot of additional manual work for your teams and for the publishing process overall. Just some of the things that, again, moving from that workflow from pre-submission all the way to the acceptance, some of the things that you're starting to introduce with these transformative agreements, with these data sharing policies, early on, even before the author comes to the journal, they need to make sure that that journal is eligible, that they're going to be able to meet the requirements that they have with their funder and with their institution. There's the submission process itself. So Waylon and Sabeel talked about this a lot, just around getting the right institution, getting the right funder linked on that paper. And that's additional burden on the author, on the researcher, to be able to get that information tied to their submission. You've got the screening step itself, and Sabeel talked about some of the work ACS does around the secondary screening, secondary attribution, where there's additional work that the editorial teams may have to make sure that the funder and that affiliation are properly linked. And then, of course, all of the downstream implications for acceptance around fee management, attributing to agreements, transformative agreements, sharing data, invoicing and reporting that needs to go on. So lots of different steps, and all of that hinges on having the right data upfront as part of that submission. And a number of these points were covered, but really, when you talk about some of the challenges here, first and foremost, from an author experience perspective, really a lot of the focus here is on whether or not the author enters or selects the right information at the point of submission. So that's a lot of burden. That's a lot of reliance on kind of a single point of failure. Some of the other challenges that occur, too many profiles. So if you think about a journal that's existed for years, you've got lots of authors and peer reviewers. Maybe they've come in once and filled out their information, and it's been years. So when you talk the submission workflow, authors are often searching for users that may already exist. So those users may have outdated or incorrect information on that profile. Another challenge is that, in a lot of cases, it's not really clear to the author what the importance of that data entry is, what that's going to drive downstream. And then finally, you've got, the curation process, that Sabeel talked about. It's expensive. It can get you to that from 15 to 90%, but it is expensive and time consuming. And of course, there's also additional risk of human error as part of that process. So I don't have any silver bullets to talk through, but we will talk about some of the new approaches that are underway, some of the things that we're seeing from the submission platform that are being used to help improve some of that data mapping. So one is kind of twofold. We talked a little bit about the linking of institutions to a standardized list. And one of the things that helps with this is better signposting. So providing some prompts, providing some details to the author and researcher about why that's important. And I think there's even more work that we're going to be doing in this front in order to help with helping really stress, the importance of this data and what it matters, why it should matter to the researcher. The other thing too is if you're relying on kind of large data sets, GRID, Ringgold, whatever the data set, Crossref, Open Funder Registry, you want to make sure that those algorithms behind that search are as optimized as possible, and you're monitoring the success rates. So this is something I know we've done some iterations on this, and we've got a machine learning model where we are working to try and continue to update and refine that. So we're trying to get as high in the quote unquote search results, the right institution for that author. Another thing that we're seeing is, integrating some portion of that sort of OA fee workflow into that early submission steps. So again, if the author's coming in, they know that their institution has an agreement with a certain publisher, having this step as part of the submission workflow where they can confirm, number one, that the funding's available, and if it's not, might be a flag that there's additional data that needs to be updated. This is another step that can help to make sure that you get the right data at that point of submission. Another thing that we've seen a lot of, and we've done integrations with a number of these systems, is what we might call built for purpose systems in front of the submission peer review systems that are in play. So Taylor and Francis has talked about this quite a bit, their new submission portal. We know a number of other publishers that are doing this. One of the things that they list on the benefits is around the personalized quotations for APC charges. So you've got publisher-driven systems around this, and then of course you've got other systems that are being put out, such as the journal checker tool by Plan S. So these can help with some of that pre-screening and help even before the author gets to the journal. And then finally, this is still, I would say, an emerging area, is around having more centralized data on a researcher. And the challenge here, you see it all the time, is they've got profiles all over the place. They've got to log into different journals. They've got all sorts of different logins. If you can have a centralized profile, a centralized place where you update it once or twice, or it gets feeds of updates, that can really help to power and improve some of those workflows for getting the right data during submission. So quick update, but that's it. Thank you, Chris.
Well, thank you indeed, Josh Dahl. Appreciate the presentation. We're going to get to a roundtable and discussion with the audience in just a moment. Josh, I was thinking about sort of a common theme here. We've been hearing about incentives, prompts, education, and so forth. And that image that Sabeel gave us of the washing machine, it was a striking one. I'm thinking the detergent here, that what's really going to make this work is going to be that kind of positive reinforcement for the authors, for the researchers, for the contributors. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think and there's ways to do it. You think about modern software, you think about modern systems. A lot of the times when a user's coming in, relying on them to read a block of text on a paragraph, as part of instructions that are on the page, or having to scroll through a lot of things, people glaze over that. People they go past that immediately. And I think there's ways to guide people to enter the right thing. So one of the things we've been experimenting with recently is just around being able to have sort of better engagement for first-time users coming in to kind of guide them through the process. And I think there's going to be a lot more of that, having a positive, like, this is why, this is the importance of this, and then being able to give them some brief instruction about how to optimize the selection. I think that's something that can happen.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Josh Dahl. And I do want to give a chance to the audience to ask some questions, and I want to have our panel rejoin us and get to as many of these as we can in the time remaining. There's a question here from Richard Wynn with Rescognito, and we've been hearing about standards. And so Richard is asking whether there are any initiatives to normalize the agreements themselves. And this gets to a point that I enjoy making all the time, which is when it comes to transformative agreements, they're rather like marriages and snowflakes. No two are alike. And that is itself a challenge for all of you, I'm sure. So I throw that open to everybody. I see Waylon Butler nodding. What about that, Waylon? This need to normalize these. If they are going to expand in the numbers that you described, we're going to come to a point where there are going to need to be some standards for the agreements themselves.
I would hope so, yes. But I do think that the challenges we're experiencing anyway is that for each of these institutions on the research institution side, they may have different structures, they may have different funding sources. One single institution may have funds that are being diverted from a library read budget. Another institution may have an OA foundation that will fund or partly fund the contract. It would be lovely that they could follow a standard and we could have some, existing boilerplate. I haven't seen that coalescing yet.
Okay, well, William Butler, thank you for that. I don't know if you have some thoughts, Sybil Geisenheiner at ACS on standardizing these agreements. ACS has done quite a number of them, and I'm sure there are common elements to each one.
Yeah, sure, there are common elements, but I see actually also more the diversification there in those agreements. I mean, if you look at the multi-payer model now coming in from CDL, that's actually putting another layer on those agreements. So it's instead of streamlining them, I think they get more individualized in a way, because as Waylon said, it's very individual to the institutions or to the consortia behind that. I mean, if you look at GIST, they have very specific requirements, for example, and see maybe a contract which is transformative in one country, not transformative for the UK, because they see it from a different standpoint. So I think there is very much of individual view on each country, actually. And the financial power as well is also very different from country to country. So I think, unfortunately, I see it actually going in the opposite direction.
All right, well, thank you for your
If I could just add to that, I think the other piece that is different about these transformative agreements is because it starts to pull in research output as well, which is going to be more individualized to the institution or to that set of authors that is being funded. Formerly, as a publisher, if I'm selling a set of journals, I'm selling the same thing. I'm going to negotiate as well as I can, right, within the bounds of what the customer can support. But incorporating that research output, some institutions have a much greater research output that is almost out of line with what their read consumption is, because they're so research intensive. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have teaching rather than research institutions that may not publish very often or at all, right? So that there's definitely that shift in that individualization institution by institution, which may then also cycle year over year. There may be a slew of completed research projects in 2021, and then there's a little lull in 22.
Well, thank you for that, Waylon Butler with AIP. We have a question from Andrea Powell, who represents, of course, Research for Life with STM, and is asking about whether systems can handle cases where authors are entitled to a waiver of an article processing charge, an APC. That's critical. Obviously, this is a global publishing ecosystem, so you want to be serving everyone. Again, Waylon, I see that would seem to be the case then with AIP, yes?
Yes, but part of that is how we're incorporating that into the actual transformative agreements themselves, in terms of taking into account any articles that would be waived or incorporated into the fee calculations.
Okay. Yeah, and I think from just that system perspective, just from a system perspective too, I think most of these systems, whether it's Copyright Clearance Center or other systems that are on the market, they definitely have kind of the workflows built in to support waivers and promotion codes and all sorts of things that are variable workflows based on kind of some input that comes in from the author.
All right. I want to bring Taunton Payne back. Taunton Payne with NIH. You opened the program for us, and you're the odd person out in this group here, not being directly involved in publishing, coming from a funder, and yet sharing this interesting journey that we're all on, which is the journey towards open science, greater transparency, and a shift in the scientific culture. So Taunton Payne, tell us a little bit more about NIH's interest in that, and future thought or thoughts for the future relationship with publishers.
Sure. So, I mean, I think, what sort of summed up in the policy that I presented is the, culmination of probably the last 20 years worth of progress towards this, in which there's been kind of, incremental changes moving towards an increasingly open framework under which we conduct publicly funded science in particular. And I think, when the policy takes effect in 2023, that will be sort of a landmark, but it will certainly not be the end of the process. And I would certainly anticipate more. And, like I said, I think there are a number of areas where publishers and journals can play a role potentially in trying to help realize some of the goals articulated there. I think in particular, what we're really interested in seeing is, researchers seeing the benefits of sharing data themselves, and that way we don't have to play such a kind of catch-up game in terms of compliance. And I think journals and publishers can really help with that in terms of helping people to make this kind of painless and sort of frictionless, and in helping to provide some of those incentives for wanting to share data. So I would certainly anticipate from NIH you would see more on the data sharing incentive side as well in the future.
All right. Well, Taunton Payne, thank you so much. And I think it's about time to wrap up our discussion. I want to thank our panelist, Taunton Payne, just now, Director of Scientific Data Sharing Policy Division at National Institutes of Health. Thank you, Taunton Payne. We also had the pleasure of the company of Josh Dahl. He's the head of publishing and associations at Clarivate Analytics. Thank you, Josh. Waylon Butler, Director of Customer Experience for AIP Publishing. Thank you very much, Waylon. And Sabeel Geisenheiner, Director of Open Science Strategy and Licensing at AC Publications. Thank you, too, for joining us today. I also want to offer thanks to STM Association, in particular, Joe Dinage, the General Manager of Events and Sponsorship, for keeping us online today and doing a great job with that. And at this point, I think it's over now to Ian Moss, STM Chief Executive Officer.
Hi, and thank you very much, Christopher. And again, thanks to Taunton, Waylon, Cyril, and Josh. That's a really fascinating session. I think a really good end to the day, and it's been a pretty full packed. And those of you who've come all the way through it, thank you very much for your attention. I think it's been really fascinating, and echoes Chris's thanks to Joe for all the work behind the scenes putting it together, and also the team at STM for helping out. Special thanks to our sponsors, Scholastica, Highwire, J&J Editorial, and Silverchair for their support, which we greatly appreciate. I mean, we decided this year for this specific conference not to charge members. I think virtual conference, it's I think a benefit of our membership that we should be helping you out and giving some of our training and tutorials and seminars where we can. I'd urge you all to keep an eye on the future seminars. We've started having regular open meetings on the policy work of STM. Efka and Joris run a number of in-depth seminars on standards and technology work and research data, as you heard of, and there are a number of things coming up on that. And of course, we have our autumn conference and December to look forward to as well. And also, there's the next 2 days, so please have a look. And if you want to sign up, particularly for maybe for Technology Day, or, then please do. We are happy to have further registrations. So we've covered a lot of ground, as I said. In short summary, please do think about signing up to the Strategic Development Goals Publishers Compact. We're a signatory. There is some amazing work going on. You heard all about it this morning from Andrea and the team there, Rachel, and it was really interesting as well, I think, to hear from Eric about the challenges during the pandemic and the perspective from a journal like many of you were right in the line of focus from the moment the first news of COVID-19 began to literally leak out in the way that it was quite hard to find out what was going on. Thanks as well in that first session to Philippa from my own alma mater, Bristol University, and the story of the founding and growth, and to Elizabeth. I have to give special thanks to Elizabeth Nolan because she anchored the discussions yesterday. Most of you won't know this, at the STM board meeting, and then presented at the conference today. So this week has been a lot of time from Elizabeth to STM, and it was a fascinating look at how they've innovated and how some of those innovations are now business as usual for the Optical Society, and that was really interesting. So do look at seamless access and get full text research. These initiatives will improve as participation widens. They're really important cross-publisher initiatives that STM is investing in on your behalf and supporting through STM Solutions, our new technology solutions arm. The work on peer review taxonomy, image manipulation and research data are really starting to take off. Please get involved. Again, the wider the participation, the better the result will be. Some of these start small, but really we want to socialize them amongst the whole of the industry and the whole of our membership. Please give your feedback ideas for future sessions. Please get involved in STM. It's really important to me and to the team that we get feedback, advice, and information from society members. We want to improve the dialogue and to continue to work on what's best support for our societies, but also you're such an important voice in many of the policy discussions that are ongoing at the moment, and your future health and strength is a really important consideration both for us and for policymakers. So thanks to the Science, Standards and Technology team, EFCA and Joris for setting up the session this afternoon, to Heather for taking us through seamless access and Get FTR, Lewis from the American Psychological Association on transparent peer review. I'll stress that again, really good if we can increase the number of people involved in that. Thanks to Icebrown Jan for the detect image alteration little preview. And that's fascinating and important work, and as is the work that Joris has been doing on research data. So that's a rapid run through. Thanks all of you who stayed, and best of luck, and see you soon.